TDs elected to the Dáil signed a disability pledge hosted by Disability Federation of Ireland. It represents 41% of the newly elected Dáil Éireann TDs. The pledge commits TDs to prioritise disability in policy and legislation and promote inclusion, social cohesion and ensure the full and equal participation of disabled people in the constituency and in communities across Ireland. Joining us this morning is Emer Begley, Director of Advocacy with Disability Federation of Ireland. Emer, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Has that figure of 71 increased since you initially reported this?
Firstly, Alan, thanks very much for having me on. The pledge was in the run-up to the election, so we would have closed the pledge on the day of the election. So we got 71 of the 174 elected TDs, which there's a lot of pledges at the time of elections, but I think this shows that disability was coming up on the doorsteps for candidates. And we have since contacted all of the elected TDs since they were elected, and we're asking them to prioritise disability. And it's very significant now that the government is being formed, and the programme for government will be the next thing that will be developed, and it's really important that disability is front and centre in that.
Well, as you know, Emer, words are cheap. It's a question of when this policy and legislation are being formulated that you guys are front and centre in terms of what your asks are. So I suppose historically, how successful have you been in order to get individual departments to perhaps change what is in legislation to the benefit of the people you represent?
You're so right, Alan, when you say talk is cheap, because it's really about concrete actions, isn't it? And election promises are one thing, but we really need to see improvements in services, access to services, housing, appropriate, accessible, wheelchair accessible houses, and looking at cost of disability and the increased cost of living for people with disability that is separate to general rising costs that everybody experiences. So in the past, we have seen a junior ministry for disability. It was held by Anne Rabbitte in the last government. And we have a department now which has responsibility for disability, the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. Now, what the composition of the new government will look like and what the departments will look like is a bit unknown, but we are hopeful that there will be seniority given to disability within the cabinet, so at least a junior ministry, but actually to see the Taoiseach take more of an oversight role, because it impacts every single department. It shouldn't just sit in one department. It's about health, education, transport, housing, social protection. So it's across all of government.
Do you feel you get a fair hearing?
I think it's really, people talking to their local TDs and their candidates in the run-up to the elections, but even now talking to the successful candidates, that makes a big difference. Like, we talk to the advisors, behind the party people, behind the scenes, the ministers. I talk to my own candidates as well, my own local politicians, but actually keeping disability on the agenda in local constituency offices is so important. There's one in five people in Ireland live with a disability, 22%. There's now a family in Ireland that doesn't have an experience of disability, and that has to be seen then when decisions are being made about prioritisation and allocation of budgets. And we saw the incident that happened in the run-up to the election with the Taoiseach, and that raised the profile of disability so far off the agenda then, which was so important because it needs to be talked about and it needs to be seen as a real issue for people, for them to say that actually we're going to take limited resources and place them here.
But you nonetheless accept that we have made huge strides when it comes to resourcing and to providing services for those with disabilities in this country.
It's if we look at other jurisdictions and other countries, Alan, like, we can see that Ireland isn't as bad as some, but we're not as good as others, So there is huge unmet need still in the country, particularly with children's services. We've seen that, colleagues that use personal assistance services. It's still a real challenge accessing services and getting appropriate services, proper level of service for people is really important. And for individuals, there is a cost of disability, having to pay for transport where there's not accessible transport.
Emer, can I just ask you, because we're running out of time here, were you disappointed that you only got 71 out of the 174? And is there any reason why you can understand why you wouldn't get a much higher hit rate from those who are standing for election?
Some of the political parties make a blanket decision not to sign pledges. But in those cases, we did get over 20% of candidates who still signed. I think it is disappointing. You would hope that every single person would pledge. We weren't asking for anything controversial, I don't think, Alan. And that is unfortunate. But I would ask people now to still talk to the people you elected. Ask them, are you going to prioritise disability?
Okay.
Is it going to be a political issue for them over the next 4 years?
We must leave it there. Emer Begley, who's Director
Thanks so much, Alan.
No, you're very welcome, who's Director of Advocacy with Disability Federation of Ireland. Thank you for joining us this morning. That is where we leave it. We're back with you tomorrow for the final one of the week, and then we're into Christmas.